Well, happy Sabbath to you all. Hope you've had a lovely week. It's nice to now be in spring. We've had quite the mild winter, I must say. Someone once joked that patience is something that you admire in the driver behind you, but not in the one ahead of you. Now, in relation to the topic of patience, Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of England, also said, "I'm extraordinarily patient, provided I get my own way in the end." Now, today in the sermon, I'd like to return to a series that I began some time back on the fruits of the Spirit. Now, I've previously covered the fruits of love, joy and peace, and the next fruit after that in Paul's list in Galatians 22 is that of patience. Now, what is patience? Well, dictionaries tell us that patience is the capacity, habit or fact of bearing pains or trials calmly or without complaint. So notice two things are involved in this definition. One is being in an unpleasant situation, and two, being calm about it. Now, if I am honest and transparent, this is probably the fruit that I struggle the most developing, with the possible exception of self-control, as the two fruits are very closely related. And when it comes to dealing with frustration and hurt, some people are more evenly tempered and internalise those frustrations, while others of us, I include myself in this group, have a more passionate nature and externalise our frustrations. And those of us in this group find patience much more of a challenge. Now, we live in a fast-paced world where so much is available instantly, be that information online or fast food or whatever. In one 2012 study involving tens of millions of users, it was found that users who are connected to the internet at faster speeds are less patient than their counterparts connected at slower speeds, demonstrating a link between the human expectation of speed and human patience. Now, some of us here can probably remember back to the dial-up days of the 1990s, impatiently waiting for the modem to connect. Now, these scientific studies have led many social commentators to conclude that the rapid pace of technology is rewiring humans to be less and less patient. Now, in the New Testament, there are two words that are commonly translated as patient. Now, one is the Greek word humpomone, which means patient endurance, and the other is the Greek word that Paul uses in Galatians 5, which is macrothumia. Now, the first part of this Greek word, macro, is where we get our English prefix macro from. It means large or long. Now, the second part of macrothumia comes from thumos, which means temper. Therefore, macrothumia literally means long-tempered, the opposite of short-tempered or having a short fuse. Now, as I mentioned before, two things are involved with being patient. One is being in an unpleasant situation, and the second is being calm about it. Now, the first part is something that none of us can avoid in life at times, being in unpleasant situations. Now, in 1 Peter 4 and verse 12, the Apostle Peter wrote, "Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing has happened to you." Now, we cannot avoid difficulties in life, though some people carry on as if they have a right to nothing unpleasant or difficult happening to them. Now, sometimes we can feel like this, or that we've had such an accumulation of problems in life that we now feel that we've got a right to no more problems or difficulties from here on. However, that's just not the way that life is. We will all continue to have both good and bad things to deal with. That's just the way that life is. Now, with good preparation and developing good habits, we can and should minimise the bad things that might happen to us, but that won't remove all of our problems, as so much of our life is out of our control. Now, when bad or unpleasant things do happen in life, it is our attitude and our perspective towards those things that is all important towards developing godly character and patience. Now, there are four areas where we need to develop patience. And the first of these is showing patience with other people. The second is showing patience towards our circumstances. Another is showing patience with God. And finally, at times, we have to be patient with ourselves. So, how do we develop the right attitude and perspective when bad or unpleasant things happen in life and develop patience towards others, our circumstances, with God and with ourselves? Well, let's look at 3 points that can help us to develop more patience. Now, the first point, our starting point to help us overcome impatience and the wrong kind of anger, is by being humble and not selfishly demanding our own way. Now, there was one former tennis player back in the 70s and 80s whose outbursts on the tennis court became legendary. And he took real or supposed wrongs far too seriously. Now, the strange irony is that his catchphrase when he got angry at others was, "You cannot be serious," even though it was he who was taking things far too seriously. Now, such anger is closely connected to selfishness, a desire to always have things go our way. Now, he showed no impatience or forbearance whenever he felt that he was wronged. Now, when things don't go our way, we need to take care with how we respond. We need to have a humility and a graciousness to accept it when circumstances don't go our way. When we find ourselves becoming impatient, we should check what is in our hearts and ask, am I being selfish and demanding my own way with what I am unhappy and impatient about? Now, what if people really do the wrong thing to us? Now, do we have a gentle and forgiving spirit, or do we harshly give it to them? Now, when we are humble and think lowly of ourselves and our own rights in the right kind of a way, we won't be so demanding of others or circumstances always having to go our own way. We'll be more forbearing of adversities and the inconveniences of life. Now, we see lots of people in our society who have a problem with road rage. Now, how do we react, for example, when someone does something wrong on the road when we're driving? Now, I do a lot of driving, being a courier by trade, so I see no shortage of dumb things on the road. Now, I find that humbly recognising that I've done my own fair share of dumb things in those moments helps me to react in a much more patient way when I'm on the road. Now, this principle applies to any time others we deal with delay us or cause problems for us. Do we impulsively react, allowing our frustrations to get the better of us, or do we humbly recognise that we too are sinners who God has been merciful to, and from that humble and thankful recognition of his mercy, show mercy and patience with others? Now, the book of Proverbs is full of advice about patience, but we'll look at just one over in Proverbs 19 and verse 11 if you'd like to turn there. Now, here over in Proverbs 19 verse 11 we read, "A man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression." So that's point one. Now, a second point that will help us develop more patience is to be flexible with our expectations. Now, as I mentioned before, with good preparation and developing good habits, we can and should minimise the problems that happen to us and have what we want in a timely manner. But we have to remember that so much of life is out of our control. So, as a result of that, so many things in our life take longer, sometimes very much longer than we expect. Now, impatience comes when what we want to happen doesn't happen when we expect it to happen. Too often, we have too high expectations of others, of God, our circumstances, and even ourselves. Now, what happens when reality doesn't meet our expectations? Are we stubborn and inflexible, or do we in a humble manner choose to be flexible and are okay with things taking longer, sometimes very much longer than we would like. Now, this flexible, humble approach is discussed over in James chapter 4, if you'd like to turn there. Now, here in James 4, we'll read from verses 13 to 15, where it says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapour that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that." Now, sometimes we get impatient with our own spiritual growth when it comes to battling problems that take far longer than we would like to overcome. Now, there was one time in my life when I was at a very low ebb with a particular problem that I was battling. And I was looking for something else in a book when I inadvertently flicked to another section that I hadn't read in that same book. Now, it sort of appeared as if God was directing me to a passage that said pretty much everything that I really needed to hear at that moment in time. It spoke of God's incredible patience with us when we struggle with sins, and compared God's working with us like marinating a tough piece of meat. There's just simply no way to rush the process. And God has given us a lifetime to soak in his grace and to become the people that he wants us to be. Now, I found that very moving to read, and as if God was putting his arm around me and saying, look, it's okay, we've got plenty of time to work on this. We'll get there in the end. Now, the third point that I have here to help us to develop more patience is to trust God and view our lives from his higher perspective. Now, we often tend to be less patient and short-tempered when we are tired and run down, and rest and recovery can help with that. We can also be prone to impatience when deep down we're not all that happy with how our life is going. Now, those negative feelings towards the state of our life can easily play into Satan's hands, needing little to trigger off an outburst of anger. Now, to counter this, we need to have a more positive attitude towards life, which can be developed by developing faith in God's ability to work things out in our life. Now, sometimes in life we get too easily bent out of shape over small, relatively trivial matters. Now, it's good to take a higher perspective and question how important some matters that might upset us are in the grand scheme of things. Now, it's embarrassing how many times over the years that I've blown up over something going wrong with my computer, only to figure out a solution or a workaround soon after I've blown up about it. Now, these days I just try and recognise the end from the beginning and realise I'll figure it out eventually, just inconveniently a lot later than I would like to. Now, sometimes, however, we have trials and painful reversals of life with things that really do mean a lot to us and are not trivial. In these times, when impatience and anger enter our hearts, it is often a sign that we are reacting out of fear and not out of faith. We feel scared and we feel like life is out of our control, and it's easy to lash out at these times when it hurts. Now, when I look back over times when I've lost it over, for example, financial reversals, I can see how much my reactions were panic attacks born out of fear. Now, over the past few years, I've been truly humbled and thankful with how God has taught me through a series of major financial blessings through other people, not to fear, but to trust him more with these situations. Now, God knows the true urgency of every situation we go through in life, and in his infinite wisdom, he knows when and how to intervene. If the problem is not as urgent as we believe, God may make us wait. But at least we know by his seeming non-intervention that the problem is not quite as urgent as we thought. Now, numerous times in the book of Psalms, we are told to wait on the Lord. And he truly does have our best interests at heart. Now, in the book of Exodus, in chapter 14, verse 13, when the Israelites were trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea, Moses told the people, Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Or to put it in Charlton Heston's words, behold his mighty hand. Now we too need to choose faith in God instead of being afraid, and this will help us to develop patience, the ability to remain calm in difficult or unpleasant situations and trust in God's deliverance. So, in conclusion, we have seen that patience is the capacity of bearing trials and pains calmly or without complaint. It is something that we have to exercise towards other people, towards our circumstances, as well as towards God and ourselves. Now, we can develop patience, first of all, by being humble and not selfishly demanding our own way. We can also develop patience by being flexible with our circumstances and expectations. And finally, we can develop patience by more fully trusting in God and viewing our lives from his higher and eternal perspective.